I never thought my father's 70th birthday would be the night my life changed forever. The ballroom was glowing with golden light from crystal chandeliers, and the sound of champagne glasses clinking filled the air. Family, business partners, and old friends from every corner of my father's empire had gathered to celebrate him. People called him a legend, a self-made billionaire, a man who built Calder Enterprises from nothing into a corporation worth $120 million. Everyone admired him, but to me, he was always someone distant, someone I had spent my whole life trying to reach but never could. I was standing off to the side when my father, Victor Calder, rose to his feet. He tapped his glass with a silver fork, and the chatter immediately stopped. All eyes turned to him. Even at 70, his presence commanded the room. His gray hair was slicked back, his tailored black suit looked sharp, and his voice carried the authority of a man who never tolerated weakness. "My friends," he said, raising his glass, "tonight is not just about celebrating my life. It is about securing the future of everything I've built." My older brother Nolan, standing tall beside him, smirked as if he already knew what was coming. He had always been the golden child, the one groomed to inherit everything. 2 years older than me, he carried the same sharp jawline and piercing eyes as our father, and he loved the comparisons. He lived in the penthouse, flew in the jet, and held a senior position in the company, though everyone knew he hadn't earned it. I stayed quiet in the corner, my glass untouched. Even at that moment, I held on to a tiny hope that maybe, just maybe, my father would finally recognize me. Victor lifted his glass higher. "I am proud to announce tonight that my son, Nolan, will inherit Calder Enterprises, along with my penthouse in New York, and of course, the jet that has carried me across the world for decades." The room erupted in applause. Nolan grinned, basking in the attention. My chest tightened, but I didn't let myself move. Then my father's eyes shifted, locking onto me. "As for you, Adrian," he said, his voice cutting through the air, "you get nothing." The words struck like a blade, sharp and merciless. Whispers spread through the guests, but he wasn't finished. "Because you are not truly my son." The room exploded into laughter. Some tried to hide it behind their hands, others laughed openly. I stood frozen. My blood ran cold, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. My mother, Elena, sat at the front table. Her eyes cast downward, her face pale, refusing to look at me. She had always avoided taking sides, but her silence in that moment cut as deep as his words. Nolan chuckled loudly, leaning in toward our father as if this was all some inside joke. The guests laughed along, eager to mirror the man of the hour. I felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on me. My ears burned, my stomach churned, but I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I clenched my fists under the tablecloth. Inside, my heart was shattering. I had spent my whole life trying to prove I was worthy of his approval, but in that single moment he stripped me of everything. Not just the company, not just the wealth, but even my identity. He had erased me in front of everyone who mattered in his world. The laughter went on, echoing in my head like thunder, until suddenly a new sound cut through it all. A man at the back of the room stood up. He wore a dark, tailored suit, and his presence was calm yet commanding. The laughter died instantly, curiosity replacing it. He adjusted his tie and cleared his throat. "Mr. Calder," he said firmly, his voice deep and steady, "that statement is not only cruel, it is false." Every head turned toward him. My father's smile faltered for the first time that night. Nolan frowned, clearly caught off guard. My own heart skipped a beat. The room, moments ago roaring with laughter, fell into silence. All I could hear was the faint clinking of ice in glasses as people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. For the first time that night I felt a flicker of hope, though I had no idea who this man was or why he had chosen to speak. But one thing was clear. Whatever he was about to say had the power to change everything. Before that night in the ballroom, My life had always felt like a long shadow cast by my father and brother. My name is Adrian Calder, and from the outside, it looked like I had grown up with every advantage. The truth was very different. I was born into a family where power was currency and affection was scarce. My father, Victor Calder, made sure of that. He built Calder Enterprises with the kind of cutthroat ambition that destroyed competitors and even strained the people closest to him. To the world, he was a titan, the embodiment of success. To me, he was a man who measured worth in dollars and loyalty in obedience. From the time I could walk, I noticed the difference in how he treated Nolan and me. Nolan, my older brother, was the mirror image of my father in every way. He had the same commanding posture, the same relentless confidence, and the same hunger for control. I remember being 7 years old when Nolan scored his first soccer goal in front of my father. Victor stood up, clapped loudly, and shouted his name with pride. That same game, when I tripped and scraped my knee, he didn't even glance at me. Instead, he barked, "Stand up, Adrian." Don't embarrass yourself, I did stand up, but not because of his words. I stood because my grandfather had once told me, "Falling doesn't define you. Standing does." That grandfather, my mother's father, was the only one who ever gave me the kind of attention every child craves. His name was Henry Morrow, and though he passed away when I was 19, his lessons never left me. He was not a wealthy man like my father, but he carried himself with quiet dignity. He taught me about honesty, hard work, and the importance of keeping your head high even when others tried to push you down. He never told me outright, but I always felt that he understood how out of place I was in the Calder family. My mother, Helena, was beautiful and refined, but she carried an air of silence with her. She rarely stood up to Victor. At times I wondered if she feared him, or if she simply accepted her place in his world. With me, she was gentle, but never fiercely protective. Her love felt real but muted, as though it had to exist quietly so it wouldn't offend my father. By the time I was in high school, I had stopped expecting fairness from Victor. He gave Nolan the best tutors, the best connections, the best internships. I built my own path. I loved design and construction, so I studied architecture. I worked part-time jobs, saved money, and earned scholarships. I didn't want my father's empire. I wanted to build something of my own. Still, no matter how much I told myself I didn't care, a part of me longed for his approval. It was the small things. Every birthday, I hoped he would look at me and say he was proud. Every time I shared a new project I was working on, I waited for even a flicker of interest. But his eyes always returned to Nolan, as though I was nothing more than a shadow in the corner of the room. As adults, the gap only widened. Nolan became a senior executive in Calder Enterprises at 27. The truth was he didn't earn that position. It was handed to him. He was reckless with money and arrogant with people, but my father defended him at every turn. I, on the other hand, had opened my own small architecture firm. It wasn't enormous, but it was mine. I worked hard, earned respect from clients, and built a life that felt honest. Yet, at family gatherings, it was always Nolan's voice that boomed through the dining room, Nolan's achievements that were toasted, Nolan's future that was discussed. When the invitation came for Victor's 70th birthday celebration, I wasn't surprised. I knew it would be grand, hosted in a ballroom with chandeliers and a guest list that read like a magazine spread of New York's elite. I knew Nolan would be center stage, but something inside me still ached with the thought that maybe, just maybe, my father would see me differently at 70. Perhaps age had softened him. Perhaps he had realized that success meant nothing without family. That hope was what made me put on my best suit that night. I told myself I was going to honor my father, even if he never honored me. I rehearsed words of gratitude in my head, imagining a moment when he might nod at me and finally acknowledge me as his son. When I walked into the ballroom, the sight almost took my breath away. Golden light reflected off the marble floors. The chandeliers sparkled like stars, and waiters in crisp uniforms carried trays of champagne. Old business partners, family friends, and relatives I hadn't seen in years filled the tables. Everywhere I looked, there were smiles and laughter. But even in that crowd, I felt alone. Nolan spotted me first. He strolled over, his glass of scotch in hand, his grin wide. "Well, if it isn't the Calder family charity case," he said under his breath, just loud enough for me to hear. My jaw tightened, but I didn't respond. He thrived on getting a reaction out of me. Instead, I let the insult hang in the air and walked past him. I found my seat near the back of the room, not far from where my mother sat in silence beside my father's chair. I nodded at her, but she only gave me a faint smile before looking away. I told myself it didn't matter. I had come to pay respect, nothing more. Yet deep down, I wanted more. I wanted to believe that this night could be different, that for once my father might look at me not as the unwanted son, not as the outsider, but as Adrian, his child. As I sipped my water and watched the guests raise their glasses to toast him, I reminded myself of something my grandfather had told me before he passed. A man's worth isn't measured by who ignores him, but by how he carries himself when the world does. I didn't know it then, but those words were about to be tested in a way I could never have imagined. The moment my father stood at the head of the ballroom, the room fell into complete silence. Even at 70, Victor Calder commanded attention like no one else. He tapped his glass with a fork, and the sound rang sharp against the chatter. I knew something significant was coming. My father was not a man who wasted words, and when he spoke, he expected the world to listen. He lifted his glass and said, "Tonight is not only about celebrating my life. It is about honoring the future. Everything I have built, everything I have worked for, must live on. Tonight, I name my successor." The applause was immediate, almost rehearsed. My eyes shifted to Nolan, who was already grinning, chest puffed, ready to accept the crown he believed had always been his. He was dressed in an immaculate navy suit, his tie perfectly knotted, his expression smug with anticipation. I sat still, my heart heavy but calm. A small part of me, buried deep, still hoped that my father might surprise me, that maybe he would say both his sons would share in the legacy, that maybe for the first time I would stand beside Nolan as an equal. Victor's voice cut through my thoughts. "My son, Nolan Calder, will inherit Calder Enterprises. He will take control of my $120 million company, continue my vision, and carry forward my name." The crowd burst into applause, loud and enthusiastic. Glasses clinked, smiles spread across every face. My father held up a hand to quiet them, and then continued. "Along with Calder Enterprises, Nolan will inherit my penthouse in New York and the private jet that has carried me to every corner of the world." Nolan raised his glass with a proud smile, soaking in the admiration. People leaned forward to shake his hand, slap his shoulder, congratulate him. He looked radiant under the spotlight, basking in glory. Then my father turned his gaze on me. His sharp blue eyes locked onto mine, and the air seemed to thicken. He said, "As for you, Adrian, you get nothing." The words were delivered without hesitation, without the slightest crack of warmth. The applause faltered, the room shifted, and then he added the strike that would cut deeper than anything I had ever felt. "You get nothing because you are not truly my son." For a moment the room was still, and then the laughter started. It began with a few chuckles but quickly spread like fire. Guests laughed into their glasses, some nudged each other, others laughed openly at my expense. Nolan threw his head back and laughed loudly, clearly enjoying the spectacle. My face burned, but I sat frozen in my chair. My chest tightened, my throat dry. It felt as if the ground had opened beneath me, and I was falling in front of everyone I had ever known. I had expected him to favor Nolan. I had expected him to choose him as heir, but to strip me of my identity in front of the world was a cruelty I had never imagined he was capable of. I glanced at my mother. She sat with her hands clasped in her lap, her head slightly bowed. She did not speak, she did not object. Her silence was louder than any laughter in that room. She was watching her son be humiliated and said nothing. Inside, my emotions collided. Rage, sorrow, betrayal, and shame surged through me all at once. I wanted to stand and shout that he was wrong, that I was his son, that his blood ran through my veins whether he accepted it or not. I wanted to slam my fists on the table and wipe the smug smile off Nolan's face. But I didn't. Instead, I remained seated, my hands clenched into fists under the tablecloth, my nails pressing into my palms. The sound of laughter felt endless, like a storm battering me from every direction. I forced my face into a mask, refusing to let them see the tears that threatened to rise. Victor smirked, as if proud of his performance. Nolan leaned closer to him and whispered something, and they both chuckled. Guests looked at me with a mix of amusement and pity. Some shook their heads as if I had deserved this. Others simply enjoyed the drama. I thought of my grandfather in that moment. His words came back to me. A man's worth isn't measured by who ignores him, but by how he carries himself when the world does. Those words steadied me. I sat tall, silent, unbroken on the surface, though inside I was bleeding. The humiliation reached its peak when one of Nolan's friends raised his glass and shouted, "To the real heir!" The crowd roared with laughter again. My heart pounded, my vision blurred, but I stayed silent. The weight of the betrayal pressed down harder than anything I had experienced in my life. I realized that in my father's eyes, I had never been his son. He had only tolerated me because he had to. All the years of hoping for his approval, all the years of working to prove myself, had been meaningless. My silence was not weakness. It was survival. If I had spoken then, my words would have been drowned out by laughter. If I had risen, I would have looked desperate. So I stayed still, and that choice would prove to be the only thing that saved me. Because as the last of the laughter echoed through the ballroom, something unexpected happened. At the back of the room, a man in a tailored suit rose to his feet. He adjusted his jacket, cleared his throat, and in a voice strong and steady said, "Mr. Calder, with all due respect, that statement is not only cruel. It is false." The laughter died instantly. Every head turned. My father's face stiffened, Nolan's smirk faded, and the air grew heavy with silence. I turned too, my eyes locking on the man, and for the first time that night I felt something spark inside me. Hope. The man in the suit stood tall at the back of the ballroom, his presence cutting through the laughter like a blade. The crowd, moments ago roaring with amusement, fell into silence. He was not a familiar face to me, but his confidence radiated authority. His suit was tailored, his tie perfectly knotted, and his dark hair streaked with silver. He looked like a man who belonged in a courtroom rather than at a birthday celebration. "Mr. Calder," he said firmly, his voice deep and unwavering, "your statement is false." The room stirred with confusion. Some guests exchanged uneasy glances. Others leaned in, eager to witness what might unfold. My father narrowed his eyes, clearly irritated by the interruption. "And who," he demanded, "are you to challenge me in my own house?" The man stepped forward, unhurried, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. When he reached the front, he stopped near my father's table. "My name is Daniel Mercer," he said. "I'm here tonight as legal representative of Henry Morrow, the late father of your wife Elena and the grandfather of Adrian." The name struck me instantly. My grandfather. The man who had believed in me when no one else did. I straightened in my seat, my heart racing. For years, I had thought my connection to him ended with his death. To hear his name spoken now, at this moment of humiliation, felt like a lifeline thrown into the storm. My father's jaw tightened. "Henry has been dead for over a decade," he said sharply. "What business of his could possibly remain?" Daniel Mercer looked at him without flinching. "The business of truth, and the matter of inheritance. Mr. Morrow left behind documents that were sealed and entrusted to me. He anticipated a day like this. The crowd gasped. My brother Nolan's smug grin faltered, replaced by a look of unease. My mother's face turned pale as she clasped her hands together more tightly, her eyes darting between my father and the lawyer. My father scoffed. "This is absurd. You barge into my celebration and speak nonsense in front of my guests. Adrian is not my son. That fact stands, and nothing you say will change it." For the first time that evening I stood. My chair scraped against the polished floor and all eyes turned to me. My legs felt heavy, but I forced myself upright. My voice was steady as I said, "Then let him speak, Father. If there is truth here, I want to hear it." Gasps rippled through the guests again. I had broken my silence, and the weight of that decision filled the room. My father glared at me, his eyes burning with anger. "Sit down, Adrian," he hissed. "Do not make this worse for yourself." But I didn't sit. I met his gaze, refusing to be silenced any longer. I have been humiliated in front of everyone tonight. If there is more to my story, I deserve to know it. For the first time in my life, I chose defiance. It was not reckless rage, it was quiet strength. I was not a child seeking approval, nor a shadow hiding behind Nolan. I was a man who demanded the truth. Daniel Mercer nodded toward me. "Your grandfather ensured that you would never be erased, Adrian. He left his legacy in your hands. The documents I carry prove this, and I will not allow his wishes to be ignored." The room buzzed with whispers. Guests craned their necks, eager to see what revelations were about to be uncovered. Nolan leaned toward my father, whispering urgently, but Victor's face was stone. He was losing control of the evening, and for a man like him, that was more threatening than anything else. Inside, I felt something shift. All the years of silence, all the years of swallowing humiliation and pretending it didn't matter, had led to this moment. I realized that my decision to stand, to claim my right to hear the truth, was more than an act of defiance. It was the first step toward breaking free from the cage my father had built around me. Daniel Mercer reached into his briefcase and held up a sealed envelope. In this envelope are documents that were to be revealed only if Adrian's place in this family was denied. Henry Morrow saw the cruelty in this household. He predicted that Victor Calder would one day attempt to erase his grandson. Tonight, his prediction has come true. The silence was suffocating. Every guest was riveted, waiting to see what came next. My father's hand gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. Nolan's face was flushed with frustration. My mother's lips trembled as she whispered something I could not hear. I inhaled deeply, my chest rising with determination. I had spent my life waiting for my father to choose me. That night, I chose myself. I looked directly at Daniel Mercer and said, "Open it. Tell them everything that decision sealed, the turning point." No matter what was inside that envelope, there would be no going back. The truth, long buried, was about to come into the light, and I was ready to face it. The man in the suit broke the seal. The crisp sound of tearing paper echoed louder than the laughter had minutes before. Guests leaned forward, their anticipation thick in the air. My heart pounded, but I stood firm. The humiliation that had weighed me down moments ago had transformed into resolve. I no longer cared about my father's approval. I no longer feared Nolan's arrogance or the judgment of strangers. What mattered was the truth. And in that moment I understood something I had never grasped before. My power did not come from Victor Calder. It did not come from Calder Enterprises or the penthouse or the jet. It came from my decision to stand tall, to demand respect, and to claim my right to be seen. The turning point was not just in Daniel Mercer's hands, it was in mine. And for the first time in my life, I felt ready for whatever came next. The ballroom was silent except for the sound of paper tearing as Daniel Mercer opened the envelope. Every eye in the room followed his movements. The same guests who had laughed at me moments before now leaned forward, their laughter replaced by unease. The golden chandeliers glowed above us, but the air felt heavy, thick with anticipation. Daniel carefully unfolded the papers and glanced at me before turning to face the crowd. His voice carried the clarity of truth. "This is the last will and testament of Henry Morrow." It was signed and notarized before his death and entrusted to me with explicit instructions. Its purpose was to protect Adrian Calder, his grandson, should there come a time when his identity or rightful place was denied. Gasps rippled through the room. My mother closed her eyes, her lips pressed tight as though she had been waiting for this moment yet dreaded its arrival. My father's jaw was rigid, his face pale but composed. Nolan shifted uncomfortably, his smirk gone. Daniel continued. Henry Morrow was not only a man of principle, he was a man of foresight. He purchased controlling shares of Calder Enterprises in its earliest days, when Victor Calder needed capital to grow his empire. Those shares were never sold. At the time of his death, he transferred them entirely into Adrian's name. Adrian Calder is the legal owner of 51% of Calder Enterprises. The ballroom erupted. Some guests gasped loudly, others muttered to one another, and a few even stood to catch a better glimpse of me. My heart pounded in my chest. For a moment I could not move. 51%, more than half the company. The very empire my father had built and spent his life controlling had been handed to me without my knowledge. Daniel raised his hand to quiet the room. Furthermore, Mr. Morrow left a personal letter to Adrian to be read only when these documents were revealed. He held out a sealed letter, yellowed slightly with age. My hands trembled as I took it. The paper felt heavier than anything I had ever held. Victor finally broke his silence, his voice sharp with anger. "This is a farce. My company is mine. My son Nolan has earned it. This man has no right to interfere in my affairs." Daniel met his glare without flinching. "It ceased being solely your company the moment you accepted Henry Morrow's investment. You may have built Calder Enterprises, Mr. Calder, but it was your father-in-law who ensured its survival. His shares are legally binding, and Adrian holds them now." The crowd buzzed with whispers, scandal coursing through the air like electricity. Nolan turned to my father, his voice loud with frustration. "Tell him this isn't true. Stop this now." But my father had no words. For the first time in my life, I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Fear. I opened the letter. My grandfather's handwriting covered the page in neat, steady strokes. I read silently at first, the words striking deep. "Adrian, I knew the day would come when you would be tested." I saw the cruelty in Victor's heart and the favoritism he showed Nolan. "I wanted you to know that you were never unwanted. You were my blood, my grandson, and my greatest hope. I invested in the company not for Victor, but for you. When the time came, I wanted you to hold the power to choose your own path. Do not let their cruelty define you. Let your strength define you." My throat tightened. For years I had believed I was invisible, unworthy, forgotten. Yet here, in my hands, was proof that I had been seen and believed in all along. I looked up at my father. His face was drained of color, his fists clenched on the table. The man who had humiliated me minutes ago now sat powerless. The man who declared I was nothing had just been proven wrong in front of everyone he sought to impress. Nolan slammed his glass down on the table, his voice shaking with rage. "This is ridiculous. You cannot possibly think you're in control. You have no experience. You have nothing." For the first time that night I spoke with strength. "You're wrong, Nolan. I have everything that matters. I have the truth. I have the trust of the only man who ever believed in me. And now I have the power to decide what happens to this company." The room fell silent again. My words rang louder than the music that had once filled the hall. Guests looked at me not with laughter, but with respect. My mother finally rose from her seat. Her voice was soft, but it carried across the room. Your grandfather always knew, Adrian. He told me many times that you were the one with his spirit. Tonight I am proud to say he was right." Tears glistened in her eyes as she looked at me. Perhaps for the first time, not with hesitation but with pride. Victor tried to stand, but his legs wavered, and he sat back down. His empire, his control, his dominance had been shattered in an instant. He had mocked me, stripped me of dignity, and erased my name, but the truth had risen higher than his cruelty. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. My voice was calm but resolute. "I never wanted your wealth, Father. I never asked for your empire. All I ever wanted was your respect. But tonight I learned that I don't need it. My worth does not come from you. It comes from me, and from the man who believed in me when you never did." The applause that followed was not forced or hollow. It rose from genuine respect, a recognition of truth finally spoken. Some guests even stood, clapping with sincerity. Nolan stormed out of the ballroom, his face red with anger. My father remained in his chair, silent and defeated. In that moment I felt something I had never felt before. Freedom. The applause slowly faded, leaving behind a heavy silence that felt different from the one earlier that night. This silence carried weight, respect, and realization. I stood tall at the center of the ballroom, no longer the forgotten son sitting in the shadows. For years I had been overlooked, dismissed, and even denied my place in this family. Yet here I was, holding the truth that had been hidden, a truth that restored my dignity and changed everything. My mother approached me first. Elena's steps were hesitant, her expression caught between sorrow and pride. She stopped in front of me, her hand trembling as she reached for mine. For a moment she said nothing, only searching my face with tearful eyes. Finally, her voice broke the silence. "Adrian, I should have protected you. I should have spoken up years ago, but I stayed silent. I was afraid. Tonight I see the man you have become, and I am proud of you. Your grandfather would be proud too." Her words filled a void I had carried for years. I nodded, unable to fully express the mixture of relief and forgiveness I felt. I squeezed her hand gently and whispered, "Thank you, Mother." Across the room, my father remained seated. Victor Calder, the man who had built an empire, now looked like a shadow of himself. His shoulders slumped, his face hardened not by pride but by defeat. He stared at the table, refusing to meet my eyes. The man who had mocked me, who had told me I was nothing, now had no words. Nolan had stormed out minutes earlier, his rage echoing in the sound of the doors slamming shut. For as long as I could remember, he had been the golden child, the heir, the one everyone admired. Tonight, that illusion crumbled. Without my father's power to shield him, he was just another man unprepared to face the truth. Guests whispered in small clusters. Some avoided looking at me, embarrassed by their laughter earlier. Others came forward quietly, shaking my hand, offering words of respect. "Your grandfather raised a remarkable man," one older gentleman said. Another added, "It takes strength to stand tall in the face of humiliation. You earned more tonight than wealth could ever buy." Their words mattered less than they might think, but they carried a message I had longed to hear all my life: acknowledgement. As the night wound down, I walked outside into the cool New York air. The city lights glimmered against the dark sky, the sounds of traffic humming in the distance. For the first time in years, I felt light. My chest no longer carried the weight of rejection. My steps no longer dragged under the burden of trying to be seen. I pulled my grandfather's letter from my jacket and read it again under the streetlight. His words steadied me. "Do not let their cruelty define you. Let your strength define you." He had trusted me to carry on his legacy not through wealth or power, but through character. And in that moment I realized that the real inheritance was not the company, not the penthouse, and not the jet. It was the truth, the resilience, and the dignity he had left me. I thought back to the boy I had been, standing on a soccer field with scraped knees while my father ignored me. That boy had grown into a man who had finally proven, not to his father, but to himself, that he was worthy. The lessons of that night were clear. Family is not defined by cruelty or by blood alone. True worth does not come from wealth or recognition, but from the courage to stand when others want you to fall. My father had tried to strip me of everything, but instead, he had revealed the strength I never knew I carried. As I looked up at the night sky, I felt a peace I had never experienced before. I was no longer chasing my father's approval. I was no longer competing with my brother's shadow. I was standing as my own man, carrying forward the legacy of someone who had always believed in me. That night, I walked into the ballroom as the forgotten son. I walked out as the rightful heir, not just to a company, but to the truth and the man my grandfather always knew I could become. And that is why this story matters. Because all of us, in one way or another, face moments where we are told we are not enough. We face rejection, humiliation, or betrayal, but those moments do not define us. What defines us is how we rise, how we choose to carry ourselves when the world laughs. So, if my story spoke to you, if it made you feel something, I ask you to do one thing. Like this video so it reaches more people who might need to hear it. Share it with someone who is struggling, someone who feels unseen, because maybe it will give them the strength to stand. Leave a comment below and tell me what this story meant to you. I would love to read your thoughts. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story like this. Together, we can remind people that their worth is never decided by those who try to break them. Their worth is decided by the strength they carry inside.